In this video, we're going to talk about how to arrive at unbound consciousness and what to do when you are experiencing unbound consciousness. This arose from a question somebody asked who was going through the self-inquiry process I laid out in my book and had arrived at that state or that stage of unbound consciousness for several moments, but was unsure what to do at that point. What do you do when you're experiencing a thoughtless state for a short time? So in response to that question, I decided to make this video to clarify two things. One is what it means to arrive at unbound consciousness with a few pointers on how you might achieve that. And then what to do when you start to taste unbound consciousness. So first of all, what is unbound consciousness? What do I mean by that? To explain what I mean by unbound consciousness, it's helpful to describe what the usual experience of consciousness is, and then contrast that to what I mean by unbound consciousness. The usual experience of consciousness is a polarized experience where we feel like we are the one doing the thinking, or a subjective pole, and there's an objective pole, which is the thoughts that we are paying attention to most of the time we're awake. I should also point out that most of the time we're awake and experiencing thoughts in this way, we're so identified with the thoughts, we don't realize this is happening. We do occasionally become aware of thoughts as such, but most of the time we're so involved in the thinking process, we feel like it's the actual world. We feel like it's our actual life that we're engaged in when we're thinking, but we're not. It's a polarized internal process in consciousness where we're taking ourselves to be the subject experiencing an objective world. This is so built into the way we process, the way we communicate, the way we think about ourselves, the way we experience the world, that it seems completely normal. So the first step in waking up from the dream of separation is to break that spell, see through it, and recognize that that was actually never happening. That dualistic experience inside of consciousness is a sort of hypnotic spell caused by thought, caused by polarized thinking. So one of the steps in breaking that spell, or the step that gets you right at the edge of awakening, is to recognize what unbound consciousness is experientially. Not to understand it, not to intellectually grasp what the idea of unbound consciousness is, or even to grasp the model I'm using right now to describe it. It has to be experiential. You have to be knowingly conscious without an object of consciousness, without an object of thought, without experiencing an objective world made out of thought. So you could say that this is to be pure subjectivity, pure I, pure sense of I am. This is unbound consciousness. So in my chapter on awakening, I describe in great detail how to approach this. For this video, I'll just riff on the subject a little bit and kind of point to it from a few different angles. So the first angle is to approach thought by feel. So it's to become interested in what the experience is of thinking. So we're going to turn our attention toward thought. We're going to feel into the texture of what a thought is, how it moves, how it arises, and what it moves in. A thought isn't something in the objective world. It's not out in front of you. It doesn't walk into the room and sit in a chair in front of you. It's somewhere internal. So let's turn our attention there and just look and feel into what it feels like to be the thinker. Any thought that arises, regardless of the content, it can be, I don't understand this. It can be an image of something that happened a few minutes ago or earlier in the day. It can be an image of something that's going to happen later. It might be an image of your body, your face. But whatever thought is arising in your mind, just give it your attention. Don't wrestle with it. Don't try to change it into something else. Just experience it. As if to say, what is that? What is it made out of? A thought is kind of like watching a movie in your mind. But if you got curious enough about that movie or the screen it's playing on, you could walk right up to it. Put your hand in that light, see what it's made out of. Turn towards the projector. What is consciousness as it turns into thought? And when you start to get a feel for that, when you start to get a feel for the mysteriousness of a thought, keeping your attention right on the thought, you can start to feel your way back to the subject, to the thinker. And notice the thinker is made out of the same substance as the thought. The thinker and the thought are not two in this space. The sense of you, the sense of the listener, the sense of the awareness, the aware one, the conscious one. Can you find a place where that exists separate from any thought? Now, when you recognize this sameness, the thinker and the thought aren't separate, then you just kind of rest there. It might feel like a little bit of a movement or a wave. You might feel like your attention's sloshing around in your mind and consciousness, or just kind of moving in an easy way, or even a circuit. It might just feel like movement of thought with no content. It might feel like pure self moving out in all directions, including every thought, including all of the space of the thinker, of the thinking, until it's all just one continuous experience of consciousness. One continuous experience of being, or of I. Now, if you can feel into that, you just sort of remain there. There's an alertness to it, but it can be completely contentless, meaning no thoughts are forming. Just kind of an awareness that's aware in every direction. A knowing that's self-knowing. Knowing only the knowing. Just like a purity of the knower, requiring no object, because every object is also part of the knower. It's part of the knowing. This is pure consciousness, unbound consciousness. It's not bound to an object of thought. So that's one way in. Another way in is to de-identify from thoughts one by one. So just notice the next thought that's going to arise, whatever it is. And the moment you recognize the thought, call it out to yourself as a thought. So it can be, my head hurts. Oh, that's a thought. It can be, that sound is annoying. Oh, that's a thought. It can be a self-narrative. I don't know how to meditate. Oh, another thought. And as soon as we recognize the thought as a thought, then we can kind of turn our attention to what else is here. Because we're recognizing that usually thoughts are structuring our experience. But when we disregard the thought as not actually here, because it's always pointing somewhere else, or it's saying something that's not directly experienceable right here and right now, like a sound is, or a sensation is, or a visual experience is, then we can let it go. We can turn our attention somewhere else. So what's the next thought? Just be ready. And as soon as you recognize it as a thought, as an arising thought, or a formed thought, Just set it aside. Oh, that's a thought. Now what? What else is here? And you notice the gap before another thought comes. Don't make any more thoughts. Stay in the gap. But be alert for a thought to come spontaneously. And as soon as it does, just set it aside as a thought. Oh, that's a thought. Back to the gap. And just notice the gap expand until the next thought arrives. It might last a few seconds. It might last 20 or 30 seconds. It might last longer. This gap might also feel like the pure sense of I. Or it might not feel like anything specific because we're not thinking, we're not labeling. So it's pure, alert attention, but not interested in thinking. So in that gap, and remember, gap is also a thought. In that absence of thoughts, that's what I'm pointing to when I say unbound consciousness. You're not asleep, but you're also not thinking. Now, I want to make one other point about this unbound consciousness. The mind is sneaky. It'll tell you that without thinking, you can't know it's unbound consciousness. But that is one thought. The thought actually says, oh, without thinking, you won't know you're there. Then you can just disregard that as another thought and return to the gap. Because you absolutely can know unbound consciousness with no thoughts at all. So just stay right there. Now, the point of the video was to talk about what to do when you've arrived at unbound consciousness. And is that actually awakening to experience unbound consciousness? So I'll answer the second question first. It's not awakening. Not yet. But it's very fertile ground for awakening. Once you come to this place, there's nothing more you can do. You can give yourself to this experience of pure conscious experience, pure conscious being, and remain alert. Remain in that thoughtless space. But there's nothing more you can do. The rest is out of your hands, but you can commit to just remaining here, regardless of how you feel, regardless of how the body reacts. So it's very common, once you first find out that you can guide yourself into unbound consciousness and remain there, that the body will have a strong response, a fear response. And again, without thoughts, it's literally a physiologic experience. A thought will say, I'm dying. This is the most horrible thing I've ever experienced. Whatever the thought says, I can't handle it. And you just disregard each thought. Oh, that's another thought. Back to the gap. Oh, that's another thought. Your heart might be racing. You might feel sweaty. You might feel sick to your stomach for a few minutes. But just stay there. Stay with that unbound consciousness. And the fear response will subside. It won't last forever. It might be intense for a while, but even intense is a descriptor, a thought. Just let the body experience what it needs to experience. And as you remain in this unbound conscious state, at some point the body will calm down. And it will just be a neutral, aware, thoughtless, conscious space. Is this awakening? Not yet. So just remain here. Once you're able to cultivate this, and once you've gone through a fear barrier, if you do, most people do, but it doesn't mean you will. Don't think about it. Don't obsess over whether it was there or not. That's just thoughts. But if it comes, it's okay. If it doesn't come, it's okay. But if you've cultivated the ability to remain in this thoughtless space for a time, and or gone through that fear threshold, then again, there's nothing more to do. Just stay here. Just remain with it. Reality will do the work. I promise. Because why not? Why not just stay here? If there aren't thoughts saying, oh, every time I get to this place, I don't know what to do and it never works, then you're getting caught back in thoughts. Be aware of those thoughts. Be alert for the thoughts that are practice thoughts, self-monitoring thoughts. And just keep letting go when you recognize that's just another thought. I think of a satellite or a rocket launched into space that's slingshotting itself off of celestial bodies and using their gravity to shoot farther into space. That's just a mental model, but it could feel a bit like that. So just be very alert for these subtle monitoring thoughts, self-monitoring thoughts, practice thoughts. Oh, I can get to this space and then this thing always happens where I lose track of something, right? Another thought. Oh, that's another thought. Now what's here? And just go back to that space. Exquisitely neutral. It's contentless. It's uninteresting to the thought process because the thought process can say nothing about it. But the thought process is dissolved fully in it and it's made fully out of it. So everything you've ever thought is already here. Everything you ever thought you were is here. Everything you ever thought the world was is here. In its pure form, in its unmanifest form. Pure conscious. Without having to turn into anything. So just remain with it. Don't move. Remain in that neutrality. That's your practice. That's all there is to do. And then be patient. If you can really remain here, and you're not getting entangled in thoughts again, it's just a matter of time. And even anticipating what's coming is just another thought. Oh, I think it's almost happening. Another thought. Oh, what if I missed it? Another thought. So now what's here? And you've let go of those thoughts. This is how we do it. Just stay the course. Remain in that alert, thoughtless, neutral space. Let me know how this was, if it was helpful for you, or if you have further questions. Thanks.